Well, good morning. Brother Chad Long, Delhi Baptist Church here. And my mother-in-law is visiting, and I'll tell you the truth. It's times like this I find that I'm not Ruth. And yeah, I'm a poet, and I know it. No, I love my mother-in-law. But anyway, they don't get up early. So we're outside today, and honestly, I like this better. I don't want to wake anybody up doing these in the morning. So it's good to be outside. Got a little bit of rain, and it feels good, and not a lot of traffic, so it's quiet and it's pretty. And anyhow, this is me on my front porch. Well, I don't want to spend too much time talking about things other than our lesson because our lesson's fixing to get good. I want to remind you of the passage in Deuteronomy quickly because it goes with chapter 4, and you need to understand this was the law. As odd a custom as it may be for us, it was the way that it was then. So anyhow, in Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 9, the Bible says, "If brethren dwell together, and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she bear shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel." They'll raise that first child as though it came from the original husband. And that was the custom. As odd as that may be, that was the custom. And it would keep the posterity of the name. Verse 7, "And if the man like not to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders, and say, My husband's brother refuseth to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. And then the elders of the city shall call him, speak unto him, and if he stand to it, and say, I like not to take her, then shall his brother's wife," now watch this, we're going to talk about this today, "then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, So shall it be done unto that man that will not build up his brother's house." So as we look at that, we'll come to Ruth chapter 4. Now remember, when we left off in Ruth chapter 3, Boaz is determined to get this thing handled because not only do I believe he's in love with Ruth, but he is willing, more than willing, to have her as his wife and perform the part of a kinsman and redeemer. So we come to chapter 4, and it says in verse 1, "Then went Boaz up to the gate." Now remember, we just talked about the gate. This is where business was handled and where court-type issues were dealt with. So this is where you would go instead of the courthouse today downtown. You would go to the gate. And I can't imagine, because of the way we use gates, I can't imagine how this was set up. I really ought to look that up. How they had the seats set and how anybody could. But I mean, I understand the reasoning for the location. The reason we use courthouses today is because in the center of town somewhere, there's usually, not all cities, but most of them have a square, and there's just a central location where you can put everything and everybody can find the center of town. Even a stranger that don't know your town can usually find the courthouse by going to the center of town, looking for the square. It's usually sitting right in the middle of the square in most of your Texas cities. I can't speak for everywhere in the world, but I can speak for Texas. I've lived in several cities. That's how it is in Paris. That's how it is in Waco. It's how it is pretty much in Lockhart. So anyhow, but in that day, the gates where everybody comes in and goes out. That's the most easy place to find anything. If you're a visitor, a stranger, if everything, all your social stuff's at the gate, well, it's not so hard to find. You don't have to go all the way into the city and into people's homes and personal areas. You can find what you need right there in the gates of the city. So anyhow, verse 1, Boaz goes up to the gate and he sits down there. So apparently they had chairs and they were for this purpose. And behold, the kinsman, and remember, he's a wealthy man, so anytime he wants to go sit down up there, they're going to listen to him anyway. Behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spoke came by, and whom he said he is such a one, unto whom he said such a one, ho, such a one, turn aside. Let me make this a little more fun. This is what he did. First of all, the Bible doesn't tell us this man's name, but he had spoken of him already. He had already mentioned to Ruth, hey, there's a guy who's closer kin to you, who has more right to be your kinsman redeemer than I do. And so when he sees him, it says, when he saw him, he said, ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. Here's what that was like. Hey, you! It doesn't tell us his name. Ho, such a one means, ho, hey there, you guy, come here. That's what that means. Behold, the kinsman whom Boaz spoke of behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spoke came by unto him, unto whom he said, ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit ye down here. And they sat down. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth the parcel of land which was our brother Elimelech's. Now, she didn't really have anything, but this was the way the law worked. I mean, that land belongs to Elimelech. Even if he had lost it or abandoned it, you had the ability to redeem it during the year of Jubilee. So even if you lose it, you know it's going to be restored to you. So it's hard to know if Naomi actually had this land and had it for sale, or if what this means is it's going to be up for grabs for the next 50 years. I mean, it's hard to fully understand this because I'm not Jewish. I've read it and I've got some ideas on it, but I don't know for sure. So we're just going to take the text at its word, at what it says here. He says, hey, Naomi's got some land and she wants to sell it, just a parcel of it. It belonged to Elimelech. Verse 4, I thought to advertise these things, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. If thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me that I may know it. For there is none to redeem it beside thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So in verse 4, here's what's happening. There's another guy who's a closer kin who has the right to, remember, it's a three-part redemption. There's a redeeming of the land, the redeeming of the people, or wives rather, and then the bearing of seed to the dead. So in a way, you're redeeming he that died, you're redeeming the wife, and you're redeeming the land. So this is what's going on here. As long as it's just the land, man, who wouldn't be interested in that? Even today, if my neighbors over here decide they want to sell some land, I guarantee you people will be talking about it, advertising that. There will be people interested. So anyhow, as long as it was the land, this guy who's never named, this other kinsman, he's interested. So he says, if thou will redeem it, redeem it. If thou will not redeem it, tell me that I may know. There's none to redeem it besides you and I, or I'm after you. And he says, I will redeem it. Now watch Boaz. He's smart. He brought the land up first because he wanted to start with that. He knew there'd probably be some interest there. So then he says in verse 5, Then said Boaz, What day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. So now the plot begins to thicken. Boaz is saying, look, you can have the land, you can redeem it, but the day that you do, you've got to reconcile that with what you owe to Ruth because her husband died. Now, I don't know how much of this man was aware of. I mean, maybe he had heard, maybe he hadn't, but he obviously was not aware that Ruth was in this deal or even being thought of. This tells me one of two things. Either A, this other kinsman didn't keep up with things, just wasn't aware of stuff, current events, which is possible but unlikely. More likely is that he didn't expect anyone to hold him to it, because apparently during the period of the judges that this happened, these laws were not always enforced, not always honored and adhered to. While, if anyone brought it up, then yes, you have to go to the letter of the law. You got to go to the writings of Moses, and you got to adhere to these. No one brings it up. It's one of those out of sight, out of mind things. So anyhow, Boaz says, the day you buy the field off Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, which means you're going to have to marry her and raise up a child to her, and this is being mentioned. Verse 6, and the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now here's what he's saying. I'd love to have the land, but I can't get mixed up with Ruth. That'll mess up my inheritance that I've got worked out for my children, or, he may not even have had children. He may have had some close kin, a brother or an uncle. His father may still have been alive. There may have been some other family member that he was hoping to leave his stuff to. In the moment that you introduce Ruth into the picture, now you've got to raise up a son and leave him something. He's got to be, he's got to be taken care of. So he doesn't want to mess up what he's got going. And this reminds me of people today. When I try to talk to people about the Lord, and y'all know I do, right? I try to talk to people about the Lord. One of the biggest answers I get back is, man, I'm good. I don't want to rock the boat. Life's going good for me right now. I've got a good job. I've got a reasonably good relationship with my spouse. I've got good kids. Or I can't tell you how many times I've had people tell me, man, I'm good. I'm good like I am. I'm good where I'm at in life. I don't want to mess with anything. I literally had a family tell me one time, the patriarch of the family, he told me, he said, every time we start going to church, everything goes south for us. He said, we've tried before. We know we ought to be in church. We believe in God. But every time we try to serve God, things just go bad. He said, man, we do better when we don't go. And I wanted to tell him, and I didn't. I wanted to tell him that the reason it was like that is because he hadn't fully given his heart to Jesus. It's one thing to be saved and to know that you're saved. It's another thing entirely to surrender your life, your whole heart, your life, your everything to God. As long as you've still got one foot in the world, it's really, really hard to see the glorious benefits of serving God in a church. Because you've got to surrender your will to His, and His will has to be foremost in your life, and that's a hard thing for people to do, especially if they have anything that they care about. When you care about things, it's hard to give those things up. Well, that's the problem here. This kinsman has got things he cares about, things he's considering, things that are more important to him than the law of Moses. It's still that way today. There are things that are more important to people than doing what's right or honoring God with their life. And it's just a sad commentary on the state of affairs in our world, even today, and how it's been that way ever since Boaz's time and even before that. We've got to be willing to lose to gain. And we've got to understand that none of these things are ours. You live in a nice home. I live in a nice home. You drive good, solid vehicles. Man, I drive a Ford. It don't get much better than that. But these things don't move me. They don't matter to me. I joke about it, but I don't care about these things. Because if the Lord wants to do something in me that requires me to give them up, and I'm unwilling to give them up, then He's not able to do anything in me. And then I'm not useful for Him. I got tickled at the Thomas the Train series because it's after my time. They didn't have that when I was a kid, and they didn't really have it when I started having kids, but it came out somewhere in there between these last few children. And I remember watching some of this Thomas the Train. Not so much for me and my kids. We didn't really ever get into it, but for some family members that were into it, you buy a birthday gift for a nephew or a niece or something, and you ask what they're into, and it's Thomas the Train. Well, I looked into Thomas the Train. And one of the most interesting things about Thomas the Train is it talks, repetitively about being a useful engine, And I just found that really cool, because that's what we should be teaching our children about what they're supposed to be for God, a useful vessel. A vessel that God can use for His honor and His glory. We belong to Him anyway. So anyhow, I spent enough time on that. Kinsman said, I can't redeem it. I'll mar my own inheritance. Redeem it to yourself. I cannot redeem it. Now watch this. Verse 7. Now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. You know why he plucked it off? Because the alternative is to have Ruth take it off of him and spit in his face. So he didn't mind the shame of losing a shoe, having to walk home without one. He didn't want anybody spitting in his face, and I can understand that. And this shows me that even though the law says in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 9, which we read, that you have this right and that this is the way things are done. Even today, people will take what they know to be the law and they'll change it or find loopholes or find ways to make it more palatable for them. It used to be you would hang somebody for stealing a horse or for stealing anything big or hurting somebody severely or killing them. There used to be a hanging offense for cattle rustling and other things. Well, that wasn't palatable to some people, so they changed it. As far as I know, that's still in the books. We just don't enforce it anymore. That's what's happening here. It's enforceable, but nobody shows up to spit in his face. What Boaz does right here is he gets 10 witnesses at the city gate, and these people are a witness and a reference. Unless he kills all 10 of them, he's got 10 people who will stand and say, I heard that man say he couldn't redeem that land he didn't want to Mars on the inheritance. So with that being the case, he takes off his shoe, he gives it to Boaz, and that was the testimony. I don't know what they do with the shoe. I don't know if they put it on the mantle, if they dip it in gold or bronze. I don't know what they do with the shoe. But that shoe is like a holy writ as far as they're concerned. It's evidence. Hey, this is how I got that man's shoe. I didn't beat him up to take it. I got it in this deal that we made. So anyhow, that's the way that was. Verse 8, Therefore the kinsman said to Boaz, Buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, You are witnesses today, that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. Excuse me. That the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren, and from the gate of his place ye are witnesses this day. And all the people that were in the gate, and the elders said, We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem, and let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. In other words, not only did they witness this thing, they blessed him and wished him well and honored his request and the agreement made between him and the other kinsmen. Now this is what Boaz hoped would happen. I believe this is what his plan was anyway. That's the reason he approached the guy the way he did. And this all got handled early. In fact, I'm convinced this whole thing probably took less time than this devotional's taken to explain it. I mean, all Boaz had to do was show up, find the guy, holler him over, and bring it up and make the agreement, and they're done. And now we get to share the happy news with Ruth. So anyway, I hope that you'll join me tomorrow to finish this chapter and to study just a little more about what this means. See, there's some interesting stuff that goes along with this that I haven't even scratched the surface of yet. I've been waiting for the appropriate time. What I want you to get out of this is remember this kinsman who's not named in Scripture. He's not honored at all. And how his unwillingness to surrender to the will of the Lord cost him potentially a wonderful wife and a lineage in the line of Jesus. You know, we'd know who this guy was if he had agreed to follow the law. And the main thing I want you to take away from that, there's going to always be people who will honor God with their lives. There's always going to be people who will, and there's always going to be people who won't. And just make sure that you're one of those who will. Make sure that when the Lord calls on you to do something, that your answer to him is not, well, I'm content with the way things are. My life's fine like it is. I don't want to monkey it up. I don't want to rock the boat. Because if that's your answer to him, he's not going to be able to use you or utilize you in accordance with his will you're going to miss a blessing, my friend. That guy had no idea what he was missing out on. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. But listen, I don't want you to miss out on what God's got for you either. I don't want to miss out on it myself. So let's be willing to follow the Lord, to do what He's called us to do, and not let worldly things, they shouldn't even figure into our decisions for Christ. Okay, they really shouldn't. If you cared that much about your stuff, you've got some other issues you need to work on. I know people who love their jobs so much that they're not going to risk doing anything that costs them their job, or there's lots of scenarios I could use, but that's just the way some folks are. They're just not going to risk it. They don't want to monkey it up, and they could really use a measure of faith. Trust the Lord that He's got all that worked out. If you was to lose your job, He'd have a better one for you. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. You guys have a wonderful day, and please do put your hearts and minds on the Lord and focus solely on Him. Glorify Him. I love y'all. We'll see y'all later.